Look, I don't know how to say this. This is a very disturbing case. This is a pretty disgusting one. If the allegations are true about all this, my heart really goes out to the family here, because this is not one you hear every day. And I really hope that, you got to sit down for this one. So fair warning, this is a tough one. But I say all that because there are both criminal charges and a lawsuit in connection with a former Arby's manager in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, accused of not just spitting in a woman's food, but also giving her herpes. Unfortunately, let's discuss this. So I'm going to break it all down with you. I want to start with the criminal case, and then I'll get into the civil case. So I want to read you directly from the probable cause affidavit for the arrest warrant for Amanda M. Hendrickx. Quote, on April 1st, 2026, at approximately 16:30 hours, I, Zane Mann, a commissioned uniform officer with City of Broken Bow, took a walk-in report was on April 16th. At 52 minutes and 57 seconds, Amanda is removing meat from the slicer. Amanda has the meat in her hands and lifts it to neck level and leans her head down, and you can see the saliva leave her mouth and go into the sandwich. Amanda continues making the other 3 sandwiches and sending out the order. On April 17th, I was able to contact Amanda requesting an interview on April 18th, and she agreed to meet at the Broken Bow Police Department. On April 18th, Amanda called the police department and stated to me that she was unable to make the interview due to not having transportation. While speaking with Amanda, she made the utterance that I have the footage and she was not going to waste my time. Yes, she did it. And Church now claims that due to this alleged spitting incident, she has herpes. So Hendrickx has now been charged with felony poisoning with intent to injure, which is my understanding carries up to 5 years in prison. This is different than what the initial suspected charges were. But in this criminal case, my legal perspective is evidence seems arguably strong. Now, unless a defense attorney can get the surveillance footage thrown out by arguing that the search warrant was defective, that it was based on son, my husband, I don't want to kiss my husband. He ate the food. Because he hasn't had an outbreak doesn't mean he doesn't have it. So now we have the civil lawsuit. This is a lawsuit filed by Jennica Church and her family, including her husband, including her children, and it is against Arby's of Broken Bow, Arby Arc Restaurants LLC, and Flynn Restaurant Group LP, which are defined as the entities that either owned, controlled, or operated that local Arby's restaurant. And also, it's against Hendrickx as well, okay? But really, the big money, you are going after the entities. That's the purpose of this lawsuit. I want to read to you the statement of facts in the complaint, and then we're going to talk about the claims, the causes of action that they're suing for. So the complaint states that on March 28th, 2026, Jennica went to the drive-thru at this local Arby's in Broken Bow, that she had just finished working a long shift. Local reporting suggests that she was bartending. She went to pick up the food, and the complaint lays out that Hendrickx was an employee. She was responsible for preparing the food, and as you'll see, that is what attaches liability to the company, right? An employee allegedly commits a tort, a wrongful act, while in the scope of their employment. And the complaint alleged that Hendrickx intentionally and deliberately spit on the food. So they're saying this is not an accident, right? Nothing like that. Intentional, deliberate. Moreover, the complaint claims that Hendrickx knew she had herpes, HSV-1. How? The complaint claims that at the time this happened, Hendrickx had a herpes outbreak with visible lesions. So the idea is she allegedly contaminated the food with her herpes. The complaint referenced the surveillance footage that I mentioned before as well. And the herpes, right? Because defense counsel would attack that. How do you know you didn't get herpes from something else or someone else? This is going to be an examination of Jennica's life, her lifestyle, her medical history. If she can confirm the diagnosis and the treatment, and it seems like it might be memorialized, especially since you read this complaint and it has the detailed names and locations and the addresses of the medical providers, that is going to be a major part of this case. That's going to be a major piece of evidence to document that. But again, she's going to have to establish that she never had this in the past and that there's no other cause that applies. But also, I mean, my gosh, does this establish the harm component that's necessary in civil actions, right? I mean, one of the things you have to establish is what's your harm? What did you suffer? What was done to you? So important for a damages calculation. And I got to say, is that going to be a stretch for the jury? You tell a jury that someone spat on your food and gave you herpes, I think they're going to be able to understand and appreciate the trauma of that. Now, still, there's a case that has to be proven. But in terms of the harm component, I think that's probably going to be easy to assess. No, I'll even say, herpes aside, the mere allegation of someone spitting into your food is disgusting enough to warrant probably damages. Again, these are just allegations, but let me expand on that. The complaint reads, quote, plaintiff Jennica Church will continue to experience periodic outbreaks of HSV-1 for the remainder of her life. Since contracting HSV-1, plaintiff Jennica Church has suffered debilitating fear and anxiety about transmitting the virus to her family members, children, and friends. Plaintiff Jennica Church lives in constant fear that she will transmit HSV-1 to her husband, Jason Dollarhide. Plaintiff Jennica Church lives in constant fear that she will transmit HSV-1 to her minor children, SJMD and GAMD. Plaintiff Jennica Church lives in constant fear that she will transmit HSV-1 to other family members and friends. This fear and anxiety have taken over plaintiff Jennica Church's life. The fear and anxiety have caused plaintiff Jennica Church to avoid physical contact with her loved ones, including kissing and hugging her children. The fear and anxiety have caused plaintiff Jennica Church to avoid intimate contact with her husband. The fear and anxiety have severely impaired plaintiff Jennica Church's quality of life and ability to enjoy normal family relationships. The fear and anxiety have caused plaintiff Jennica Church severe emotional distress, mental anguish, and psychological suffering. Plaintiff Jennica Church has required and will continue to require medical treatment, counseling, and therapy to address the physical and psychological effects of the HSV-1 infection. And the alleged harm suffered by Stephen is laid out as well in the complaint. But from there, this document, this complaint claims that Patricia contacted the companies, so the defendants here, and that a rep claimed, we'll review the surveillance footage. But the complaint alleges that rep never did it and didn't get back to Patricia. Apparently, there was a follow-up contact, at least according to this complaint, and the rep allegedly lied to Patricia about watching the video and claimed the food was safe and not contaminated. The complaint alleges this was done to avoid liability, to ensure the family didn't pursue the matter legally. And furthermore, there's an allegation that the representatives called the plaintiff's home multiple times and offered limited money to not go forward with anything, namely free sandwiches and $5. That this was allegedly reckless and intentional conduct, that it's a form of harassment. Now, one thing I'll say is, how do you prove the contents of that conversation? It's not going to be a recorded conversation unless, I don't know, maybe it was on a recorded line. You know, you call somebody, you call a business to say it's on a recorded line. Maybe. Not sure if anything was memorialized in an email. But if it's only a phone call, there's no recording, you're probably going to have different accounts of that conversation, right? But again, you go back to the harm, you go back to what the damages are. The allegation is that they suffered severe emotional distress, anxiety, mental anguish, psychological injury, loss of consortium. That's an interesting one that was thrown in there, where you lose some benefits of a relationship because a harm occurred. I'm going to get into that a little bit more. But look, the way you get the companies on the hook, the argument is that the entities failed to inspect the food. They failed to do proper background checks. They failed to provide adequate training. They failed to discipline or fire Hendrickx. That they didn't set up policies or procedures to prevent something like this from happening, contamination, alleged contamination, and that it was these failures that caused what happened. Now, yes, from a legal point of view, if an employee deliberately contaminates a customer's food, it puts the company in a tough position, for sure. Counter argument would be, look, we don't have a crystal ball. We did everything right. We followed every procedure. We had no reason to believe that she would ever do something like this. Again, assuming the allegations are true. And I imagine an argument could be that she never did this to anyone in the past. You can't prove that. Although there is a part in the complaint that says, quote, upon information and belief, defendant Hendrickx has been reckless or intentional in contaminating food for other guests at the Arby's restaurant. Upon information and belief, defendant Hendrickx has engaged in a pattern or practice of contaminating food served to customers. Upon information and belief, the entity defendants knew or should have known of defendant Hendrickx's propensity to contaminate food and failed to take appropriate action to prevent such conduct. And there's also this part, quote, the filing of criminal charges against defendant Hendrickx confirms the intentional and criminal nature of her conduct. So look, the result of a criminal case won't necessarily is that what Hendrickx allegedly did was extreme and outrageous, that it exceeds all bounds of decency, which, by the way, you stop right there. If the allegation is true, spitting into somebody's food, giving them herpes, I think it would classify as that. And remember, in a complaint, you don't have to prove everything. You just have to say your allegations support those counts. I would make the argument that the allegation of someone spitting in your food with herpes and you getting herpes, that can qualify for extreme and outrageous conduct and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The extreme emotional distress component is fear, anxiety over transmitting this to others, mental anguish, shock, humiliation, psychological suffering. I'll say this again, when I see this count thrown in lawsuits, sometimes I'm skeptical. Like, it can be hard to establish that even if you accept everything is true, what the plaintiff is claiming and what they say happened to them, is that really intentional? Is that really emotional distress? Here I go back to this prior point. If all of this is true, realizing someone spat in your food and gave you herpes when you were not expecting this at all, completely changed your life. Again, I know it's an allegation, but I can see a claim like this definitely making sense and definitely being allowed to move forward. Count 3, negligence. So this is Jennica Church and Stephen Dollarheight, again, against Amanda Hendrickx. Negligence, 4 elements: duty, breach, causation, harm. Argument here, Hendrickx as an employee had a duty of care to them, a duty to use reasonable care in preparing the food, that she allegedly breached that duty. She failed to do that. What she allegedly did caused them harm, and we went over what that harm is, or what that harm is argued to be. Count 4, negligence per se. So again, Jennica Church, Stephen Dollarheight against Hendrickx. Slightly different. This is almost automatic negligence. The argument would be that allegedly the criminal violation, that the allegation that she violated a criminal statute, means that Hendrickx engaged in automatic negligence. You're automatically considered to have breached that duty. It is negligence as a matter of law. Count 5, products liability, strict liability. Jennica Church against all of the corporate entities. So here the argument is that the entities sold food products, sandwiches, and these products were defective because they were contaminated, products that were in the entity's control. It's an interesting claim, and it means strict liability is you're automatically liable if there's a problem with the product. We always think of this when there's a defective product in like an assembly line that comes out of a factory. And yes, those are cases where something gets contaminated, whether it's on purpose or by negligence, what have you. I mean, the company could be on the hook. But here you're kind of dealing with the same thing, right? You're dealing with alleged contamination on kind of like an assembly line. It's the food preparation process. And the allegation is that it was done intentionally. That's the allegation. Count 6, negligent infliction of emotional distress. This is Stephen Dollarheight against all the defendants. Similar to what we discussed before, but the argument here is that the defendants had a duty of care to provide a customer like Stephen Dollarheight with food that was safe to eat, that they breached that duty, suffered emotional distress. Count 7, negligent infliction of emotional distress. This is Patricia Dollarheight against all the defendants. Same kind of thing. Count 8, respondeat superior vicarious liability. So this is all of the plaintiffs against all the corporate defendants. Now, I want to address this one. Kind of mentioned it before. It's a very important part of major lawsuits. The actions of the employee can be imputed to the employer. So here they argue that Arby's, the company, loss of consortium for the other child. Count 14, loss of consortium. This is Patricia Dollarheight against all the defendants because Patricia is married to Stephen, other family members, same idea. And then the last count is punitive damages. This is as to all defendants for all the plaintiffs. Punitive damages, punishment damages, that the defendant's conduct was really bad, willful, wanton, reckless, malicious, justifying an award of punitive damages. This is not just about alleged spitting. It is about failing to prevent it and then allegedly making an offer so small that it would sweep the allegations under the rug. And again, looking what Hendrickx is accused of doing, again, extreme outrageous alleged conduct and behavior. By the way, punitive damages, which in traditional cases, can be quite costly, they're reserved for really, really bad, outrageous conduct. They're also seeking compensatory damages. So these are damages to make you whole again. And this is for economic losses, such as medical expenses, for non-economic losses like physical pain and suffering, mental anguish, for loss of consortium, which we talked about before, and they're also seeking a jury trial. Now, according to 2 News Oklahoma, Church had said, Jennica, if I go out to eat and see someone with a big thing on their face, I don't want them serving me food. Kind of goes into the idea about how her life is different now. The family attorney, Will Blocker, said, quote, they let it go all the way out the door and my client now has a communicable disease. That has to be a culture deeper than Arby's in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Maybe it's Flynn Restaurant Group and all 300 stores they own. I don't know, but we're going to find out. When I hear that, I wonder, is this a class action? Are you going to have more similarly situated plaintiffs who experience the same kind of thing? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But apparently, this outlet did reach out to Arby's for comment. They have not heard back yet at the time of this recording. Really, really unfortunate case, to say the least. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.